everybody. Thank you very much for having me here to this wonderful place. Thank you for this fab meeting. Thanks, Kevin and Maria. Thank you, Steve, for creating this wonderful thing that this is the inaugural event of here in Brighton. Having spoken at the Psychedelic Society meetings in Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, Leeds, is there Liverpool one? Leeds, Bristol, and here, what I've noticed, and I was saying this to Kevin earlier, the Psychedelic Society is the most incredible thing that just emerged from Stephen's brain 2 years ago and knocked us completely off track, actually, at Breaking Convention. So we set up Breaking Convention in 2010, and we thought, those of us behind the Breaking Convention, we thought we knew all of the heads in the UK. We thought we knew all the psychedelic enthusiasts. And then Steve sends this email, oh yeah, my name's Stephen Reed, we've got this thing called the Psychedelic Society. And we're like, what's this? And we turn up, and we didn't know anyone. Thousands of people that he's got on his list. He's the most incredible man to have created this movement. And it's about you guys that to keep making this work, yeah? Kevin has a big job on his hands. This is the inaugural event. It's going to work if you carry on pressing Kevin to do more, and if you get involved, and you think of topics, and you invite speakers, and you make it work. If you do all that, it's going to be really good, because otherwise there's a tendency for these things to fizzle out, and we don't want that. So keep pushing and make this work, and make it stay. Because the work of the Psychedelic Society that Stephen talked about, it's really a new way of looking at how to get this message out there. It's a lot about coming out of the closet, normalising psychedelic use, yeah? Moving away from the stereotypes. Psychedelics are not just things taken by crazy hippies at Stonehenge. Psychedelics are taken by estate agents and lawyers and solicitors and doctors and judges, and and these people need to come up and just say, yeah, I take ecstasy. No big deal. I don't have dreads, don't have a tie-dye t-shirt. I take ayahuasca sometimes. With no story attached to it of either wonderful things that happened or terrible things, just, it's a thing. And that is what's going to move this movement forward. Normalisation of this very safe and very important activity. So, anyway, I'm a psychiatrist. So just have a look at that. If you maybe not see it, either because you're at the back or because you've taken so much MDMA, you have saccadic eye movements and can't focus. There is a stronger link between childhood trauma and addiction than there is between obesity and diabetes. 2/3 of addicts report being abused as children. This means that the war on drugs is a war on traumatised people who need our help. Now that is not a frightened, bruised, humiliated 10-year-old girl sitting there. That is a piece of scum junkie. She did this to herself. It's her fault. She asked for that. She's 40 years old now, and she sits outside the cash point and asks you for your money. Don't give her any. She'll only spend it on booze. She chose to be like this. Nobody made her. It's a lifestyle choice. She doesn't have to take these drugs. Now, how shocking is it that we've allowed ourselves to turn off this empathy switch that we have for abused children, and we forget that those abused children grow up into teenagers and adults and young adults and old adults, and this empathy switch is turned off, and we forget that. And what the focus of my work over the years has brought me to the door of MDMA, because I see it as the best tool that we have in clinical medicine to tackle this very, very important problem, which is trauma. Trauma induced by childhood maltreatment and abuse, and I'm going to talk quite a lot about that tonight. So I'm a psychiatrist, which means I trained as a medical doctor, trained in medicine and surgery, specialised in mental health, specialised in child and adolescent mental health. Spent 8 years working as a consultant in child and adolescent mental health, working with abused children and their families, abusers and the abused, survivors. And then in the last 5 years I've been working in adult addictions. And this has brought me to the door of MDMA, and I'll explain why. But in a way, my own journey through child and adolescent mental health to addictions and adults with mental health is the same journey that my patients have been on. And it's this trajectory that we see from the hurt children into the difficult dissocial adolescents, and then the adults with mental disorder, that is so important for us to bear in mind that developmental trajectory as we understand mental disorder in adults. So I think Stephen's mentioned a bit of this. So as you know, there's what we call, this is really just to see where MDMA fits into this. So there's classical psychedelics, LSD, DMT, psilocybin and mescaline, which all have an action at the 2A receptor, which is a serotonin, subtype of a serotonin receptor in the cerebral cortex in the brain. And we've been doing some work at Imperial over the last 10 years with LSD and psilocybin, and DMT is now the current topic of study. I've taken part in all of these studies, both as a doctor administering the drugs, but also as a healthy volunteer. 2 weeks ago, I was injected with intravenous DMT as part of the latest study. No, I'm all right. Mescaline, I hope, is going to be next, probably a few years down the line. So MDMA is an entactogen. It does have a psychedelic. It's certainly clear. I'm very happy to call MDMA a psychedelic. It has psychedelic effects, certainly. It has a spiritual effect in about 10 to 15% of people, first-time heavy peak dose MDMA, describe a psychospiritual effect. It's not nearly as pronounced as for the classical psychedelics, where it's like 80 to 90% of people who take high-dose classical psychedelics will experience a spiritual effect, but it is there with MDMA. And there's other entactogens, the whole 2 series, which you're probably aware of. Then we've got groups like dissociative anesthetics, of which obviously ketamine is the most popular, and I come from Bristol, so I can tell you that is the case. NOS is it's the same receptors as ketamine, dissociative anesthetic. THC, obviously, as we've heard from Anna, has psychedelic properties. And then we've got a whole load of other things like ibogaine and salvia, but we're not going to be going into those. But this is really just to see where MDMA fits with these other ones. So lots of different ways of classifying the psychedelic drugs. Those based around tryptamine and those based around phenethylamine. And of course, tryptamine and phenethylamine are both precursors of endogenous compounds within the brain and the rest of the body. So this leads a lot of scholars to be looking for this endogenous psychedelic, compound that's secreted in one part of the body or another and has its action in the brain, and produces a mystical spiritual effect, psychedelic effect, in non-drug circumstances. And here we are in this wonderful place, built a long time ago by people who erroneously mistook electrical activity in the temporal lobes to be a deity. It's quite sweet, really. But yeah, spirituality is an incredible thing, spirituality, and I'm all for spirituality. And I'm really interested to be part of a team demonstrating the neurobiological basis for it. And so psychedelic drugs are really, really important for that. Don't get me wrong, spirituality is important in our lives. I don't think you live a full human experience if you don't have spirituality. So, from a phenomenological point of view, one must collude with the delusion in order to have the full human experience, in my opinion. But people need Santa Claus. So, we have the psychedelic drugs, phenethylamines. Now, that there is an endogenous psychedelic is a really hot topic, and a lot of people, Rick Strassman wrote a book in 1995, I think it was, called The Spirit Molecule, like DMT. And there's become a very exciting narrative within psychedelic community about the pineal gland. It could be DMT. There could be an endogenous psychedelic. I don't think the pineal gland has anything to do with that, and we can talk about that in a bit more detail if someone asks me that question later. So, what is the psychedelic experience? Well, it's very hard to pin it down, really, isn't it? We've tried all sorts of different ways of trying to describe what the psychedelic experience is. I could probably play it better on the trumpet than I could tell you in words. It's ineffable. It's one of its qualities is it's not describable in words. But what's really, really important from a clinical point of view is it's this ability to open up new ways of looking at old things, and tackle the rigidity that goes with our personality development, as we've heard from Stephen about personality formation. And what I'm going to talk about a little bit tonight is how that personality is formed from early childhood experience. And once it's there, it is pretty rigid. It's not completely rigid, or I'd be out of a job as a psychiatrist, but it is very hard to break the personality traits that we form from a very early age. You know, I talk to 98-year-olds, and the opinions they're giving to me were stuff they were told when they were 2 or 3 years old, and it's still there. It's very hard to break those things, but psychedelics are a tool to do that, and a tool we cannot afford to ignore in clinical medicine. As we've heard from Anna, psychedelics are involved in all of the world's religions, all of them. It makes sense, really, that an organic catalyst would encourage a sense of spirituality and mysticism, and different cultures in different places would attach some meaning to that. So, North American Euthyphed, cacti, ibogaine, ayahuasca, psilocybin mushrooms, Rastafari, Indian sadhus in the early Vedic traditions. Christianity, you know, what was the fruit that Adam ate to open his eyes and see the world as it truly appears? I mean, Terence McKenna says it's the Staphyla cubensis mushroom that grows in that part of the world. So all these religions are linked, and they're linked also through this concept of shamanism, the concept of the healer, the priest, the doctor, the judge, the family of a communal, cohesive community. And that's part of our humanity that we need to get back to, because it's our lack of connectivity that's tearing us apart and tearing apart our natural environment as well. And connectivity does not mean 10 people staring at their phones and not talking to each other just because they're connected to pictures of cats and things. So we need to put down our phones and we need to start talking to each other. We need to start doing it very quickly as well. So, Albert Hofmann discovered LSD, as we know, first synthesized it in 1938, discovered the psychedelic properties in 1943. It was packaged, sent all around the world as this substance delicid. And it was thought that, initially it was thought it could be a psychotomimetic drug. It could be used to mimic psychosis. Psychiatrists, nurses, social workers, healthcare workers could take LSD and feel what it feels like to have schizophrenia and then understand their patients better. Now, that model of LSD didn't last very long. It's not a very good psychotomimetic. I think the main reason is that with psychosis, one of the hallmarks of psychosis is lack of insight. You don't think you're unwell with psychosis by definition. Whereas even with a high-dose psychedelic session, you know you've taken a drug, and you can be told you've taken a drug and you believe it. You could argue that it might be a useful psychotomimetic if you gave it to people and told them you hadn't done so. Then they would possibly feel they're mad, but they would come down again. So, you know, it's not a good psychotomimetic, but where it was found to be useful is in psychotherapy, and Anna mentioned this as well. The concept of difference between psycholytic and psychedelic psychotherapy, where psycholytic was taking smaller doses on a regular basis to enhance typical psychoanalytical therapy. And then the psychedelic model came out of the States more, and this was taking large, high doses and having a full-blown mystical experience, and then spending some weeks unpackaging and integrating that material. So it was being explored hugely, and massive advances were made in psychiatry. 40,000 patients were given LSD between sort of the mid-50s and the mid-60s, with overwhelmingly positive results. Very, very few casualties. And we were looking at this drug in the treatment of anxiety disorders and end-of-life disorders, addictions particularly, and I want to come on and talk about addictions. So, lots of people involved in that, and I won't go into all of them, because I'm going to go and talk about childhood development. Now, children are really small, aren't they? And it's really easy to hurt them, and it's really easy to humiliate them, and to trick them and cheat them. They're really gullible. They believe you, They are hardwired to believe you, especially if you're their carer. So you can lie to them, you can hurt them, you can abuse them and exploit them really easily. And they're also really resilient, but those very early experiences have profound effects on their development. When we talk about physical abuse and sexual abuse and emotional abuse, and we talk about neglect, interestingly, often the general public think of abuse as the sexual abuse, physical abuse, and stuff that hits the radar for social services and everyone knows about. In my experience working with children, teenagers and adults, it's often the emotional abuse that is the most damaging. And I've worked with plenty of people who've got severe personality disorder type problems, and we're kind of, we're working with social services and we're going through the history and we're just thinking, there must have been some physical abuse, sexual abuse, and it wasn't. It was the drip, drip, drip effect of you're useless, you're not, no one's going to really love you. Even if they say they do, they don't really mean it because you're not a good person. I didn't really want you. You've kind of ruined my life a bit. These little tiny aspects of emotional abuse are huge damaging for a person's development and later addiction and mental health problems. So we mustn't take our eye off the ball when it comes to emotional abuse. Indeed, I've seen plenty of cases where a single episodic and discrete episode of physical or sexual abuse that happens to a child who has otherwise had a really good relationship in terms of attachment, and they can weather that. It's all about attachment, it's about those early years and how we define ourselves and what labels we hang on us to define our identity as people. These core fundamental parts of what it is to be human, what is love, what is companionship, what is a friend, what is a parent. And when you don't know when that person that's coming into the room, and you're like 4 years old and you're sitting on the floor in front of the telly, and you don't know if that person that is coming in is going to give you a kiss or cuddle, sit down and do a jigsaw with you, or whether they're going to kick you or punch you or burn you with a cigarette or rape you, and you just don't know, and there's that inconsistency, you develop a very distorted viewpoint about the fundamental parts of love, trust, care. And it's very hard to live a normal psychological life thereafter because we require those things in order to have friendships and develop relationships, especially intimate relationships. And if those are distorted and broken. Now, I'm sounding very fatalistic here, but this is why I'm interested in MDMA. So, uncontrolled damaging environments are also an important factor, as we know. And some massive social economic factors. I mean, we could probably do away with all psychiatrists if we just gave everyone a decent house and decent money and a decent career path and opportunities. Mental illness is rooted in psychosocial problems. It's rooted in poor housing, lack of education, racism, exclusion, poor education, lack of opportunities, boredom. This is where these things fester. And it's genetic as well, of course, but unfortunately the lousy genes hang around in the lousy environments. They're not spread evenly. So, I mean, you could practice eugenics, couldn't you? You could make all the posh people mate with all the poor people, and then you spread the genes around. But the way it is at the moment, the genetics that account for depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, psychosis, addictions, they all hang around in the terrible places where the schools are poor and the housing is poor and the opportunity is poor. So you've got a double whammy there in terms of risk for mental disorder. And so we have this trajectory and we forget about that. And so I'm amazed, these things like Children in Need, where we have all this gushing sentimentality for that little 5-year-old who's being abused, and we throw our money at our television screens. Poor little thing. What happens to that little 5-year-old when he's 11? Well, on goes the hood, starts buying and selling weed. By the time he's 16, buying and selling amphetamine. By the time he's 18, 20, he's addicted to heroin and alcohol. And suddenly he's scum. He's public enemy number one. He's chosen this lifestyle. He didn't have to get kicked out of all those schools. He doesn't have to take these drugs. And it is peculiar. And if we have one thing, one tool in psychiatry, it's compassion. It's the most important thing. It's an understanding of the developmental pathway that gets people from early trauma and pain into adult mental health problems. So we have to be compassionate because that's the right moral and ethical thing to do, but we also have to just know that this trajectory is an evidence, but this is a scientific point of view, as well as it being morally and ethically right. We have to understand the science. It's pretty obvious, really. If you mess up a child, you're not going to produce a wonderful adult who wants to conform. You know, these are important defense mechanisms. That little kid has to lie and cheat and steal, that 5-year-old. Because if he didn't lie and cheat and steal, he'd die. He'd die of starvation. He wouldn't have his needs met. So he lies and cheats and steals and grows up into an adult who lies and cheats and steals. And when I get this very negative viewpoint from other health professionals, you know, sitting in casualty in the middle of the night with some 16-year-old who's cut wrists, and people are saying, oh, she's attention-seeking. You know, it's like, I say to her, good for you. You bloody deserve attention. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. I want you to do that, not through cutting, and we'll find ways of working with that, but you deserve attention. And so I see this aberrant antisocial behavior of drug addicts and adults with these problems as resourceful. Well done. You know, well done. You should shout about this, yeah? Sorry if that's shocking. So we have post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's really common. It's really common, and it's much more common than we think, because we used to think about PTSD as what we now call simple PTSD, which is a single catastrophic life-threatening event, like a fire or a car crash or a one-off assault or rape or combat PTSD. But now we talk about what we call complex PTSD, which is the same as that child abuse example. It's not necessarily life-threatening catastrophic events, but multiple repeatable events over the years, just like child abuse. And it produces the same phenotypic endpoint with this disorder of hypervigilance, flashbacks and nightmares of the traumatic memories, high levels of depression and anxiety, high levels of self-harm, high levels of completed suicide. It's really hard to treat these people because what they do is, with the flashbacks and the dissociative episodes of PTSD, they will do everything they can to not think about that night when they were 8 years old and their grandfather did that. So their whole life will be built around not going there. And so they self-harm, and they take overdoses, and they use alcohol, and they use heroin, and they use sex or violence, or all these cloaking mechanisms to do anything but think about that night when they were 8. And then they go along to their psychotherapist, and their psychotherapist says, tell me about what happened to you when you were 8. So, and now then, you know, fair play, that's the tool that we use in trauma-focused psychotherapy, but it doesn't work for half of the people. So PTSD is a treatment-resistant disorder in 50% of cases, because they can't engage with that therapy. They're out the door and down the pub. So it's very hard to treat, and this is what's brought me to MDMA, because of this treatment resistance. I've seen too many young people and young adults die taking their life through suicide because they have been unable to engage in psychotherapy. They've been unable to do that work. So, I mean, what happens in the brain of that little kid with that inconsistent environment? Well, brief physiology lesson, if I may, neurophysiology lesson. So the amygdala, the one in there, this is a very ancient part of the brain. It's in all mammals, actually. It's common to all mammals. And it's the part of the brain that's triggered by stress and fear. And it triggers very instinctively the fight or flight response. It's like, whoa, God, something dangerous has just happened. Get out, fight, get ready. And it's a very old part of the brain. Now, in humans, we have a uniquely human second mechanism with our fear, called the prefrontal cortex. And it's quite likely that most of the other animals, maybe some of them, have some prefrontal cortex, but not to some great extent. But what the prefrontal cortex does is it balances that amygdala response, that instinctive response. So it's like, yes, it could be frightening, but maybe we can think about this. Maybe there's a way around it. Maybe it doesn't have to be as bad as you're saying. So it's a very sophisticated part of brain function, the prefrontal cortex there. But what happens with PTSD is that you get a massively exaggerated amygdala response and a shrunken prefrontal cortex response. And we've demonstrated this in fMRI scanners, that people with PTSD find things scarier than other people. And they're also not as good at using logic and reasoning to overcome that amygdala response. They haven't got such a developed prefrontal response. So for example, suppose a guy comes in now with a knife. My amygdala would say, shit, get out, blow with the knife. But then my prefrontal cortex would kick in slightly after and go, oh, hang on, he's got a chef's hat on. So that's kind of an example of how you can overcome the immediate amygdala response with a logical, reasoned human response. But people with PTSD struggle. Now, psychiatry today is a bit of a miserable place at times. It feels like a palliative care profession. It's very hard to treat people and cure them and see them out the door. Especially with trauma, especially where the disorders are due to their childhood experiences of trauma. And I would say that we are in psychiatry today where we were in general medicine 100 years ago. Now, at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, humanity was losing the battle to the infectious diseases. We didn't have antibiotics. We knew all about the infectious diseases. We were fabulous at classifying and diagnosing, and our epidemiology was excellent. We knew who got smallpox. We could see people dying after operations. We could see people dying in childbirth. We were starting to get an idea about microorganisms, but we didn't have a treatment. And then, at the beginning of the 20th century, we discovered antibiotics, and it just changed the face of general medicine. And we started getting on top of infectious diseases. Now, I would say that in psychiatry today, we're in a similar position. We're really, really good at classifying and diagnosing. We have this thing called the DSM-5 and the ICD-11, and we classify and diagnose all these people with mental disorder. We know what depression is, we know what anxiety disorders are, we know what phobias are, we know even the cause, we know it's due to trauma in the majority of cases, we know how it happens, but we haven't got a decent treatment. Where is our antibiotic is the question. And this is where I come to MDMA. Because the current treatments for these mental disorders are sticking plasters. They mask the symptoms. They paper over the cracks of these disorders, depression, anxiety. They don't get to the root cause. So it's a bit like, say you've got an infection, yeah, and you take paracetamol or aspirin. Now that's a good treatment. It lowers your temperature, makes you feel a bit better. But it's not an antibiotic. It masks the symptoms. It doesn't actually kill the microorganisms, aspirin or paracetamol. It just makes you feel a bit better, and that's great, why not? But if you really want to kill that bug, you've got to take the antibiotic. And that's what we're doing with our SSRIs, antidepressants, and these other treatments we use in psychiatry for these mental disorders. We mask the symptoms, we bring the temperature down. But that antidepressant isn't going to help you get back to that thing that happened when you were 8 years old. Psychotherapy is going to do that. Counselling is going to do that. Talking about it is going to do that. And that's very, very hard if you've spent 30 or 40 years doing anything but talking about that thing, which is why we have this treatment resistance. So here's the 4-methylenedioxymethamphetamine, and this is a remarkable substance, okay? It really is a remarkable substance. It directly activates the prefrontal cortex. It increases a sense of positive well-being and an ability to think more logically about good things. It actively suppresses the amygdala response and reduces the fear associated with recall of trauma. It treats PTSD. You come off your medication. It's short-acting, so it's like 2 to 5 hours. So it's clinically usable. I think the other psychedelics have fabulous uses as well. But what I've found over the years is that MDMA is probably more clinically deliverable. It's more tolerated. It's invariably pleasurable. Yeah, it's kind of, there are a few drugs in pharmacology that are always pleasurable. Opiates, I challenge any of you to take heroin and not love it. You will. You can't not. It's hardwired to have a pleasurable experience. And I'm not encouraging anyone to take heroin. I don't need to encourage anyone to take heroin. There's plenty of people taking heroin. Crack cocaine. I don't encourage you, I challenge you to smoke a crack pipe and not love it. You will love it. You can't not love it. If you don't love it, you haven't got a normal brain. And this is a really, really important part about our understanding of drugs, drug misuse and drug use. And there's a huge difference between those people who misuse drugs and become addicts, and this destroys them and their lives and their families' lives and their community. Big, big difference between those people and people who have used drugs or can use drugs. And if we don't shine the spotlight on that, then we miss a really important part of drug taking, and we don't help those people. Because why is it that you or I, who have come from lovely, happy homes and lovely, happy childhoods, can smoke crack today, but still be back at work on Monday morning? Things. And why is it that the people who can't be back at work on Monday morning because they haven't got any work? And by demonising drugs and prohibiting all drugs and demonising this molecule and making it illegal, we mask the true symptoms of drug misuse and addiction, which are social problems. And drug prohibition causes harm and causes death. And successive governments of the last 60 years have blood on their hands for deaths of young people because of drugs. So I kind of have this like fantasy of a PTSD psychotherapist sitting down at the table with a chemist. And the the chemist says, look, I've got this laboratory here. I'm going to make you a drug. What do you want? And the PTSD therapist says, oh, cool, okay. I want something that's going to treat PTSD. Can it have a bit of serotonin 1A, 1B activity, please? Because that will cause a sort of sense of positive feelings of warmth and reduction of depression, reduction of anxiety, sort of kind of ecstatic, ecstasy type feeling. Yeah, sure, I'll make it 1A, 1B, serotonin effects. Can it have a mild dopamine effect? Can it have, a little bit like amphetamine or cocaine or nicotine stimulants? Because often these people with PTSD, they are very slow and retarded in their thinking and cognitions. So can it have a bit of dopamine activity to speed them up a bit? Yeah, okay, dopamine activity. But the other thing about PTSD, says the counsellor, is that you have this sense of hypervigilance. People with PTSD are edgy. They're on edge. They're always looking for the next assailant. So we don't want to speed them up too much. Whilst giving them this dopamine stimulation, can we also give them a bit of alpha-2 adrenergic activity, which is going to slow them down and make them chilled out? And so the chemist says, what, like at the same time as dopamine? We can try. And then the counsellor says, one of the big problems about PTSD engagement in therapy is the lack of understanding of other people's points of view, because their attachment mechanism is so disordered and broken that they find it impossible to empathise with other people and their activities, and they see them only as wholly bad. So can we make it have some hormonal effect, maybe on one of the hormones like oxytocin? And the chemist says, oh yeah, oxytocin, I've heard of that. Where does that come from? Oh yeah, it's secreted from the brains of breastfeeding mothers, isn't it? Yeah, it is actually. And it increases the sense of bonding and attachment. Perfect, can we throw that in? And we have MDMA. If you were going to invent a hypothetical drug that treats and ticks all the boxes for trauma, it would be MDMA. Oh yeah, no, I forgot one of the receptors as well. The 5-HT2A receptor, which I talked about before, which is where the classicals work. So it does also have a mild psychedelic effect at the 2A receptor, which enhances this sense of thinking about things in a new way. So it really does tick all the boxes. And here's another thing that it does. It completely reverses that problem that we have with PTSD. So how does it work? I mean, as I said, from a pharmacological point of view, it should work because it ticks all those boxes. And it can have other effects within the clinical setting. It has a less psychospiritual effect, as I said, compared to the classical psychedelics, but it does have some degree of that. But it's an effect on trauma and its ability to encourage a state of mindfulness. 20 years ago, when I started in psychiatry, mindfulness was considered a bit of a crazy thing that just has sort of come from Eastern religion, and there's only a few select psychologists that are interested in it. Now it's like commonplace in every NHS clinic. Everyone's talking about mindfulness all the time, which is good. Mindfulness is being here now in this moment. It's almost the antithesis of CBT, really. You know, if you've got depression or anxiety, I'm going to teach you how not to have depression. You mustn't have depression. Don't be depressed. Don't be anxious. Here's how not to be anxious. Mindfulness is like, all right, you've got depression, you've got anxiety. Let's be anxious today then. So it's about a sense of being with and being alongside, but not being overwhelmed by it. And MDMA has this capacity. And when these patients take MDMA, I see MDMA as a sort of life jacket. It's like a sort of bulletproof vest to wear to go into battle with their trauma. And patients, when they take MDMA, they are able to, for the first time in their lives, talk about it. And when that therapist says, tell me about your rape. Now, in the past, just the word rape and they'd be out the door. They're like, I can't tell you about my rape. I can tell you. I can remember he came into the room. He had stubble on his face. He has his breath smell of whiskey. And they can talk about it in great detail under the cushion of MDMA, held in the arms of MDMA. It's not ecstasy for these people. I'm not out there giving it a good large. You know, this is painful, trauma-focused psychotherapy, and the tears are streaming down their face while they describe this, but they can just about do it under that cushion of MDMA in a way that they've never been able to do before. And that's really where it works. So there's been a number of studies done around the world, and MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, Rita showed a picture of Rick Doblin in her final slide there. They've done the bulk of the MDMA work around the world. Now, how does it work, MDMA therapy? Well, the point is that you don't take MDMA every day. You don't even take it every week. So you would have a course of psychotherapy sessions, weekly sessions, maybe 8, 10, 12, it varies. And 2 or 3 of them will be MDMA assisted. And the other ones will just be normal face-to-face, non-drug sessions. So you'd have a few weeks of preparation, then an MDMA session, then a few weeks of integration, where you talk about the material that came out, then another session, then a few more weeks, and then it's the end. So you don't take these drugs every day. Now, in a way, why is the pharma industry not interested in this? Well, pretty obviously, you only have to take it twice. You don't have to take it every single day, like these antidepressants or mood stabilizers. You know, the treatment for PTSD, right? My patients with PTSD, they are on everything. Their GPs are putting them on everything. If their mood goes a bit low, give them an antidepressant. If it goes a bit high, give them a mood stabilizer. They can't sleep, give them a hypnotic. If their paranoid thoughts get a bit too intense because they're a bit freaked out that someone's going to hurt them, give them an antipsychotic. They rattle these patients. So we're doing a couple of studies, and there's one in Cardiff. We're taking people with PTSD and putting them into an fMRI scanner and traumatizing them slightly by playing back to them a narrative recording of their traumatic experience. And we're going to test that on placebo and MDMA, specifically focusing on the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. So in a way, we kind of know this study will work, but this is a really important piece of data to demonstrate the neurobiological mechanism by which MDMA therapy works, because we know it works, but this will be all part of the grand scheme about getting a license for MDMA by 2021, so we can open clinics. Now, psychedelic drugs are very, 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 very safe. And I didn't used to say that, but I do now. And that's thanks to Terry Krebs, who was, she's pictured there with her ex-partner Paul. And they've written a lot about the safety of psychedelics. And she said, look, when doing your presentations, don't talk about risks, talk about safety, because they are overwhelmingly safe. Now, they are not 100% safe, but what is 100% safe? Nothing is 100% safe. We don't, in medicine, have this black and white, safe, dangerous thing. That's not how we do medicine. With medicine, we talk about risk-benefit analysis ratios. Every single intervention that I do as a doctor has risks. Whether it's a sticking plaster or cancer chemotherapy. I sit down with the patient in front of me and I say to myself, here's the treatment. If I don't do it, what will happen? If I do it, what will happen? What are the risks? What are the benefits? And I weigh it up. Plasters, what's the risk? It hurts when you pull them off, but the benefit is large. Cancer chemotherapy, really, really risky, but the benefit is huge. 125 milligrams of MDMA to treat someone who's had untreatable PTSD for 30 years. Is it safe for them to take 125 milligrams of MDMA in a clinical setting under the care of a nurse and a psychologist in a medical setting, having been screened and an ECG and bloods and follow-up? Of course it's bloody safe. It's ridiculous. 750,000 people take this every weekend in totally uncontrolled settings. 750,000 people every weekend take MDMA and have done for a quarter of a century. And the actual numbers of morbidity or mortality statistics are vanishingly small. Very, very, very small. Now, you can bet your life that those 5 people a year who die from MDMA get onto the front page of the Sun. And that 120,000 who die from smoking cigarettes don't. So we've been conditioned by this war on drugs to emphasize the erroneous safety profile and risk profile of MDMA. And it's wrong, and we need to tackle it. So I don't stand here and say this drug is 100% safe and that there are no risks. I do not say that before any of you treat Dr. Sessa says. So it does have risks, but they are very small compared to the risk benefits, the safety benefits. And indeed, classical psychedelics are incredibly, even safer, physiological risks. I think the highest recorded overdose of LSD is 42 grams. Mild increase in blood pressure. I mean, from a psychological point of view, who knows? But now, this is an old slide, and the reason this is an old slide is because there are some dangers with MDMA at the moment, and this is that a lot of the recreational MDMA is way too strong. And with the dark net and the shiny flakes and Silk Road, there are some very, very strong tablets out there, and I urge you to exercise great caution if you choose to use illicit recreational MDMA. Take a quarter tablet before you go any further, because it could be a 575 milligram dose of MDMA, which is just plain silly. David Nichols, who's a chemist that's done a lot of work in this subject, I was talking to him, I was stuck in a traffic jam with him for 4 hours, and we were talking about this, and 125 milligrams is the optimum dose for MDMA. Once you start getting over 125 milligrams, you flood the 1A, 1B receptors, and you're just going to be pushing up that dopamine-mediated stimulatory effect. And so a wise user of MDMA halves the dose every 2 hours. 125, 2 hours later, 62.5, 2 hours later, 31, 2 hours later, 16, and you drop the dose every 2 hours, and then you stay in that 1A, 1B receptor zone. If you're going to push the dose above 125, you may as well just take something cheaper like amphetamine or coffee. You just get wired and stay awake. So I'm saying all this because I want to reduce the harms associated with recreational drug use, not condoning, although actually, I don't know what that word means. You can do what you want. No one's going to do anything because of what I've said, but, or not. I mean, I wouldn't flatter myself to think that's the case, but if you're going to do it carefully and don't come to harm. So, objections to using psychedelics to treat addictions. Swapping one dangerous drug for another, that's bollocks, because treatment of addictions involves a lot of dangerous drugs, methadone, buprenorphine, benzodiazepine. So the drugs that we use with psychedelics are far safer than the drugs we currently use to treat addictions. The risk of becoming addicted to psychedelics. Psychedelics are really not addictive, and this is demonstrated both in animal studies and in epidemiological studies. A heavy user of LSD might be twice a year. Mushrooms when they're in season, maybe Glastonbury. That can be a regular user of LSD. People do go through stages in their life where they're taking it all the time, every weekend, but they don't tend to persist. And what I can certainly say, with hand on heart, is we do not see psychedelics hitting the radar as problem drugs in psychiatric clinics or wards. It's very, very rare. Lack of proven efficacy, that's rubbish. Sends the wrong message. So there's David Nutt, my boss. lost his job in 2010 with the ACMD for saying that, well, for stating scientific proof and evidence, but the government didn't like evidence. They want a perpetuated lie in order to maintain the drinks industry, possibly, I don't know. I really do not know how drug prohibition has persisted for 60 years. It's a most peculiar situation. The wealth of evidence against prohibition is stacked up here now. There are no longer any grounds on which to fight the drug war in terms of health or personal or societal or crime. It's absolutely barn door obvious how dangerous the policy is, but it persists. Now, I can't think of any other socio-political policy that has gone unaudited for 60 years. Every aspect of our policy has been audited. The courts, the police, the schooling, education system, we all have audits, but we are in drug policy where we were in 1966. All drugs are illegal apart from alcohol and nicotine. And it is extraordinary that in the wealth of evidence we haven't tackled that, and I don't know why. But it's very expensive to do psychedelic research. And people expect too much of psychedelics. People expect, as soon as there's any kind of negative aspect of it, then it's like, well, this is dangerous. You know, this is dangerous. Whereas we don't have that same approach with other pharmacology. The amount of drugs that I use, you know, as a child psychiatrist, spent 8 years giving 6-year-olds amphetamine and no one bats an eyelid. And suggesting that an adult can take psychedelics, it's completely doable. It's not any big deal. From a pharmacological point of view, these are a hell of a lot safer than what I'm giving out to my patients on a daily basis. It's not a level playing field, that's what that's about. These are the real dangers. These are the real dangers, the prescribed drugs. I call this, I work in Western-super-Mare, I call this the Western Quintet, because everybody is on them. Whatever the problem, it doesn't really matter what your health problem is, you're all on quetiapine, mirtazapine, zopiclone, tramadol, and pregabalin. It's really weird. And so, actually, contrary to what most people think, I spend more time as a psychiatrist taking people off drugs than I do putting them on. I don't like conspiracy theories, because I think the psychedelic research community is rife with that. I don't like pseudoscience. I like data. But you do start to wonder whether there are conspiracy theories that are maintaining this situation. Alcohol. I'm kind of running out of time, aren't I? So we chose alcohol as our study in Bristol because this country has a real problem with alcohol. We don't realise it. My sister took me out into Brighton last night, and I had an experience of this legal high. And it's really problematic. You walk down the high street, quadruples for £1. You know, our European neighbours look at us. We are weird in this country with alcohol. We have a very peculiar relationship. We're worse than anywhere else. You know, breakfast TV for kids. Oh, what were you doing last night? Oh, I was really pissed. You know, it's part of our culture. And we just... Petrol stations selling booze. When did that happen? That just appeared 5 years ago, didn't it? I mean, this just crept in. It's, you know, a can of lager in Tesco's 49p. The equivalent amount of water, 89p. It's weird. We have a peculiar problem with alcohol in this country. We don't realise it, and we are dying from it. And it's really hard to treat addictions because of this rigidity. And we heard a little bit from some of the other speakers about how you push things forward and how you break this rigidity. And this is where psychedelic drugs are so good. They strip away the labels that we hang on each other. I remember a very high-dose intravenous psilocybin experiment in which I felt my labels peeling off me. I forgot who I was completely. Like, first of all, it's like, I'm a man, my name is Ben, I'm a doctor, I'm a father, I work in Bristol, and then it's like, okay, I'm not sure that we're in Bristol, but it doesn't really matter. I know I'm in a scanner, I know I've been given psilocybin. Okay, I'm not necessarily a man called Ben, I can't remember what my name is, but at least I know I'm a human being and I'm in a scanner. And then I'm not really aware I have a body or any physical shape. And then I'm not really sure even what physicality even is. I just am. And then I'm not even that. So all of these labels are stripped off in that sort of order, really, from the superficial to the very deep. And now that's great fun if you just want to take drugs and have fun, but if your labels are, I am a shitty, worthless piece of uselessness, I deserve to be raped by my family, I deserve to be homeless, It's my fault I'm a heroin user because I've done this. If those are your labels, then we need mechanisms to take these labels away. So, our second study then is in Bristol with alcohol-dependent people. And we take them and we post-detox, we give them a course of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. And this has been 9 years in the planning. And we'll start it after Christmas. So, that's me in safety glasses and a hard hat at the laboratory up in Newcastle where they're making a kilo of MDMA for our study. When I went to see it, it was just a big conical, it was a big spherical flask of bubbling brown liquid bubbling away, but it's going to be our kilo. GMP MDMA, so 99.97%, actually 98%. They sent us an email the other day saying, dear Dr. Sessa and Dr. Doblin, your MDMA is almost finished. We guarantee the purity to be between 98 and 102%. So of course Mick Doblin's like, hey man, can we get the 102 stuff? Loads of good studies, I'm almost finished, in the UK in the last 10 years. Ketamine, MDMA, LSD, creativity stuff, Bristol psilocybin study back in 2009, the DMT study that's currently underway in Imperial. They still need a couple of participants if anyone's interested. It's a really important place, the UK, for psychedelic research. And we mustn't take our eyes off the ball there, that this is a really important part of the research community is in this country. And psychedelic research is no longer a fringe thing, you know. It's not, if any of you young people here are interested in pursuing a career in psychedelic medicine, do it. Do not fear the stigma. This is not just a bunch of crazies. This is every major leading scientific research department has a psychedelic program amidst its academia somewhere. Harvard, Yale, UCL, Bristol, Cardiff, UCLA, Johns Hopkins. You know, these are major mainstream neuroscientific research places and they have a psychedelic program. This is not just a fringe subject, just do it. And breaking convention there is tremendous fun. And not a very good place to get sleep. And I think I'll just finish there. And Sigmund Freud was a neurologist, so he was quite into the idea of brain mechanisms. And he made this statement in 1938, which is the year that the atom bomb was conceived, and it was also the year that Albert Hofmann first synthesized LSD, that back then they only had psychoanalytical psychotherapy, but he imagined a day when you could take a chemical that could change your brain and use it with psychotherapy to increase the patient's access to repressed emotional trauma. And this is what this little girl deserves, and we're doing it for her. Thank you.